I'm the daughter of a refugee. My grandfather was in the nationalist regime before Mao and the communists took over. In 1949, he took what he could carry, and they went to Korea. My mother was born in a refugee camp to my grandmother, who has bound feet. A few months after she was born, in the middle of the night, a United States plane came, and they took again what they could carry, which was even less. They boarded that plane, and they came here to Seattle. They were sponsored by a church family in Seattle who understood the duty of citizenship in this country was to extend a hand and to protect others from violence. Slide. So this is my mother, one of my brothers and myself, clearly when I was much younger. I am because my mother found safety in this country. In the United States, Ray Wachu, Chinese name, became Annette after Annette Funicello from the Mickey Mouse Club. She came to a racist Seattle that was a few years post-Japanese incarceration, a city still skeptical of people who looked Asian. And despite the torment of racist bullies, she finished high school and went to college. She walked 2 miles every day to attend the University of Washington. We are a family of Huskies. Yeah. She would meet my father at the University of Washington a few years later, also an immigrant, and marry him. She worked as a nurse for 16 years before retiring into the most strenuous job of her life, which was a full-time mom to myself and my 2 brothers. On most accounts today, she is thriving. She works out 6 days a week at the gym. She lives more than me. And like any good Asian mom, she tells me all the time that I would look better if I was a little bit smaller. But in January 2017, Annette was not happy. She looked me in my eyes and tells me that if this Muslim travel ban was in place when her family needed safety, she never would have been able to come here and live the life that she has lived. And for an instant, I see it flickering in her eyes that I rarely see, but I know it. I know for my mother and for others who have escaped war or government persecution that they are never too far from these memories. So today I come to you as a daughter of an immigrant, and of a refugee who grew up and somehow became a professor. And the rest of my talk, what I want to do is to use my expertise in the area of race, American politics, and law to try to help us understand how we got here and possibly what we can do about it. I do want to say that in the years leading up, I want to say up front that I think part of the reason we get to this moment that we're in right now is the collective silence in the years leading up to this moment. In particular, in the back of our minds, I want us to think about something sometimes I tell my students is a silence gap. So what is a silence gap? The silence gap occurs when people with power and resources remain silent about the discriminatory treatment of marginalized groups because their lives are not directly impacted. All right, slide. All right, so what to do? I like quotes. I like Maya Angelou a lot. Yeah, right. So she says here, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived. But if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And I've spent a long time trying to understand what it means to face it with courage. I still don't know the full answer to that, but I know that part of the answer is to put the experiences of people of color at the center of this nation's history and tell truths about this nation, even perhaps precisely if they are uncomfortable. When we engage in a process of truth-telling, we get a different type of history and a different set of lessons that are needed to begin the process of healing and democratic repair. So as a professor of American politics, I teach the intro course at UW with like 300 students. Anyway, so I'm always stunned by the silences that persist in the stories we tell about the founding of this country. Throughout this country, we're always regaled by stories of how ordinary Americans, we, the people, stood up to the tyranny that was Great Britain and asserted our rights for self-government. The ethos of this country, the founding story that has endured over time, tells us that the United States has been committed to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that our history can be viewed at some level as a steady fulfillment of those cherished ideals, albeit a few bumps, right? Yet casting the founding moment almost solely as triumphant obscures almost as much as it illuminates. The framers structurally and institutionally supported the erasure of women and people of color from laying claim on the founding of this country. And in the final draft of the Constitution, the framers inscribed white supremacy right along with equality and individualism. And yet we never talk about it as such. We never place like white supremacy like right there. Yes, I got to name that. I love that. All right. In the popular version of the founding, white supremacy and indigenous removal are viewed as aberrational features of American life. They were things we had to get through, things that we had to overcome. They were not enduring and certainly not institutional. In fact, it is the founding where you see the norm-making around the terror against people of color, especially African and indigenous peoples. We see that in the rationalization of the greatest form of institutionalized oppression, slavery, and we see it in the plunder of indigenous communities. But it doesn't just stop there. Moving forwards in our history, a history that is familiar to many people in this room, of course, in Japanese incarceration, we see what can happen when war is layered upon race, and when a nation is gripped by fear. Many of the legal logics that are currently in operation were developed, I think, during this period. The ethnic targeted roundups, the suspension of rights based on war, the race-based surveillance, the loyalty test, and of course, the interrogations. In so many ways, Japanese incarceration showed that this nation was capable of previously unthinkable political and legal violence against its own citizens. And we are told that these historical moments, slavery, indigenous removal, at the founding and Japanese incarceration in the middle of the 20th century, are not who we are. But that's a type of weird lie. A sanitation of history, a refusal to look the ugliness of who we are squarely in the face and deal with it. When you look at the history of this country from the perspective of people of color, there is not a time frame that exists when non-white peoples were not persecuted. I can't find it. So what can we do? I'm not proud of what has been going on in this country right now. And yet at the same time, I've never been more hopeful about the future. And I say that with all honesty as somebody who's focused on the political and legal landscape in this country. After the Muslim ban, many of us started to believe that this was not the best of who we were, that we were capable of something else. So this is what I know for sure. As people who care, as people who come from a history of government oppression and struggle, as people who know what happens when the government takes away our civil rights and our civil liberties, as people who know intimately the vulnerability of American citizenship, it is all of our responsibility to do something. It is our responsibility to resist the comforts of silence and to use our talents, whether it's your camera, your scholarship, your art, your voice, sometimes your pocketbook, to speak out against the current injustices in our country. We don't all have to march, we don't all need to make resistance art, but we are all good at something. And the challenge for everyone here is to contribute in your own way, to be a part of positive change. To be clear, we don't owe it to Arabs and Muslims, we owe it to ourselves. I read history to make sure that I don't go crazy. For I believe that our past can light a way out of the present darkness. We may not have been here before, but we've been here before. And if we don't do something to address the current moment, we're going to be here again.